Instead of us making these staff redundant, I am willing to take early retirement, I offered. There was stunned silence from the other board members. Perhaps I was setting a precedent that they didn't like. But I had an ulterior motive, a career change as if it were. I had carefully timed my apparently casual offer to give the managing director a chance to choose a way out of our current financial situation without damaging public and union relations. Ever since that, instead of us making these staff redundant, I am willing to take early retirement, I offered. There was stunned silence from the other board members. Perhaps I was setting a precedent that they didn't like. But I had an ulterior motive, a career change as if it were. I had carefully timed my apparently casual offer to give the managing director a chance to choose a way out of our current financial situation without damaging public and union relations. Ever since that party, I have been preoccupied about what I discovered about myself. I spent many hours browsing the internet to seek what I wanted, and now I know, but to fulfill my new life's dream I had to stop working for the company. I couldn't resign, as Deborah would want to know why. I had to find another way, and that had just opened up. I had presented the MD with an offer he really couldn't refuse. And it gave me a way out. Well, it would enable us to retain some of our brightest staff, said the MD, but we would be without your valuable contribution, John. I'm not so sure I want to accept your offer. I suggest we have a private conversation in my office later. I was a shareholder and a director of the company I had helped build. But to survive the recession, we had to reduce our overheads. I made good money and supported my wife, but it is now not what I wanted. Taking early retirement this way created a fait accompli that she would have to accept. I came to an agreement with the MD to resign with a good pension. I retained my shareholding. Deborah and I love each other and have a perfect marriage. I did keep long hours in the office, but we spent the rest of the time together. I earned enough for us to employ a full-time domestic helper, Julie, allowing Deborah time to spend with her own friends. We were a good match, but I now wanted something else. And this was my chance. I have some news, I said over dinner to Deborah. I'm retiring early. But, darling, I thought you enjoyed your work, said my wife. What are you going to do? I do enjoy work, but the business is changing direction to meet challenging times, and I would have to change as well. So instead of learning new tricks, I will be at home starting next month. Don't worry about me. I expect you to carry on with your life as you do now. I didn't answer her question directly. I have been retired now for a little while, and it was time to put the next part of my plan into action. Well, that wasn't true on 2 counts. There was a plan, but it was more of an inspiration, and the first part had been for me to do nothing. I just spent my time at home reading and on the computer. I did nothing constructive. I did not socialize or go out. I made no demands on Deborah's time. Life carried on as normal, except I didn't go to work. Darling, I have just had a call from the bank. Apparently we are overdrawn, said a rather alarmed Deborah. I have had a look, and our monthly outgoings are not being covered by your pension. We need to do something. I don't want us to regularly draw down from our savings. Perhaps you should not have taken up the offer of early retirement. You are certainly not doing anything useful. Let us think about what we can do. I've had an idea, Deborah said a week later. The husband of one of my friends is also retired, and he looks after the house. If you did the same, we can let Julie go, and the money we'll save will be more than enough to put us back in the black. Unless you have a better idea? I'll do whatever you say, Deborah. I can take over doing the chores and cooking. I have plenty of free time, I meekly replied. Okay, that's agreed then. As from tomorrow you can work with Julie, to learn the ropes while she works out her notice. I hope you are going to make an effort, said Deborah. I showed no emotion, just passive acceptance. But I had butterflies in my tummy. My plan was going brilliantly. I wanted to do the chores. I wanted to serve Deborah, but it had to be her idea, at her behest. She must not realize she was giving me what I wanted, that was not part of a future relationship that I wished for. I had actually put my time since retiring to good use. I had been reading up on housekeeping and cooking. I was now going to get practical training from Julie. I was to be a house husband. I would make myself indispensable to Deborah and her lifestyle. Julie had now left us and everything was going to plan. While Deborah was out with her friends, I got on with running the house. Deborah was impressed and said that I would make a good housewife for someone. John, it is my turn to host the next meeting of my book club. In the past, Julie has prepared and served us snacks and drinks, while I took part in our discussions. Will you do the same for me? Yes, of course, Deborah, whatever you wish, I replied. Darling, I haven't told my friends that you have retired. Or that I had let Julie go and you are now my house husband. They have never met you, so I was wondering if you would pretend to be a waiter that I had hired in as Julie was not available? Deborah gently pleaded. Of course, I replied, I can prepare some canapes, but my clothes would look odd. Don't worry, I'll hire a server's uniform, said a beaming and relieved Deborah. Let's do it now. She found online a suitable company that hired out all sorts of domestic and work uniforms. We sat together while she entered all the details for a complete server's uniform in my size and the style of a 5-star hotel waiter. When she was about to confirm the order, I said, I think I can hear your phone ringing. You have very good hearing, let me go and check, she said. While she was out of the room, I cleared the box 4M and ticked the box marked F. It wasn't my phone, she said when she came back into the room. Okay, where were we? Oh, yes. She clicked the box marked confirm order and that was it. My life was on the right trajectory. I now had to make sure the book club meeting was a success for Deborah. I had to ensure her friends would be impressed and she would be proud of me, not as her husband but as, if all goes to plan, as her maid. The day arrived. Deborah tried my canapes and she was over the moon. They're brilliant, John, she said, you better go and get changed. I went and changed into the hired uniform, the one for a 5-star hotel waitress. Earlier this year, we had been invited to a reverse fancy dress party, the party that changed my life. The wives and husbands went as each other. We had kept our costumes and so I was able to dress completely as a waitress, or rather the maid as I wished to be, by wearing the bra, shapewear and the black shoes with 3-inch heels from that night. But I had popped out and bought some black opaque tights that would be more in keeping. I came down dressed in a knee-length black dress with short-capped sleeves trimmed in white and a matching collar. I wore a white pinafore apron, tied with a bow and a white cap with long ribbons down my back. I had brushed my hair so that with the cap it looked as if I was sporting a short feminine style. I expect Deborah's friends would have spotted my party wig a mile away. John, shrieked Deborah. What are you wearing? For once I decided to take the initiative. This is the uniform you ordered. I wasn't sure but I cross-checked with the delivery note. I assume you decided that I should be your maid as a replacement for Julie. And, having dressed as you at that party, you thought I could pull it off. But before she had a chance to say anything I moved on and said, I do need help with the makeup, Deborah. Something's wrong, I thought I had ordered a male server's uniform. It is too late now and you do look the part. She then smirked. This could actually be fun, my friends will be impressed I have a maid and not just a domestic helper. We better go up to the bedroom so I can do your makeup before they get here. The bell rang and Deborah indicated that I should answer it. The first guests handed me their coats as they surged past me to greet Deborah. They had soon all arrived and had settled down in the lounge with Deborah in her element holding court. Joan, she called. I assume Joan must be me as it sounded a bit like John. Can you offer everyone a drink? Yes, ma'am, I replied and went to fetch a tray I had prepared earlier with a choice of Buck's Fizz or fresh orange juice. I then served the canapes and topped up the drinks. For a book club there was very little discussion about literary matters, it was all gossip about husbands, partners and lovers. When asked, Deborah quickly responded that her husband John was busy working. How true! I was pleased that no one mentioned anything that suggested Deborah was unfaithful to me. Gradually the conversation came round to congratulating Deborah on the excellence of the canapes and on her new maid. Deborah didn't correct the impression that, not only had I replaced Julie, but that I was a full-time live-in maid. After all, I did seem to know my way around the place. I was feeling on top of the moon. I had reached a milestone in my, admittedly uncertain, plan. I had now gone from husband to house husband to maid. I knew what I wanted to achieve, but I had to take whatever opportunities arose to get there. After her guests had all said their goodbyes, it was now early evening. They had stayed longer than expected. She took me in her arms and gave me a long lingering kiss. I let her take the lead, but returned the affection. "Well, Joan," she smiled looking into my eyes, "that was a big surprise and a huge success. I never thought you could make such a wonderful maid. As far as my friends are concerned, I now have a live-in maid called Joan, but of course that is only when I have guests, otherwise I live with a husband called John. You can leave the clearing up until the morning. Let's have an early night." "Let me put the food away first, ma'am, then I'll be right up," I carefully said. In the morning I got up early, dressed as John, to prepare breakfast and to clear up from the day before. Her breakfast was ready when Deborah appeared. She gave me a kiss and sat down to eat. She didn't ask whether I was eating or not, which was what I wanted. "John, I'm sorry, I got carried away yesterday. I should have asked you if you were okay with being the maid. I just assumed you were, as you had worn the wrong uniform without questioning me. Then I called you Joan. I picked Joan so if I was heard calling you John it could be mistaken. Can you forgive me? You are my wife. I am glad I was able to please you in front of your friends," I replied. I did not want to admit there was no reason for forgiveness. "If you are okay with pretending to be my maid from time to time, we'd better get you sorted out. By the way, I was impressed how you handled the heels," said a grinning Deborah. "I can be your maid when you need me to be," I reassured her, "and thanks for the compliment, I think, about me coping with heels. But you did make me practice, before that party. That was useful. It helped to reinforce the perception that she was in control." When Deborah got home the following evening she told me, "I am going to invite my closest friends for dinner next Saturday. But with you, if you don't mind, as my maid, and so I can maintain the lie. I would lose face and my social standing if it was now discovered I didn't have a maid." The day of the dinner was approaching. All of Deborah's close friends were available in the evening, which was surprising as they usually only met each other during the weekday. The number I was catering for was 5, including Deborah. "John, one of my dinner guests will be staying the night. Please prepare the guest room. And to maintain the pretense that you are the maid, you will need to spend the night in the downstairs guest room," Deborah instructed. The downstairs guest room was originally used by a previous owner for an au pair and is ideal for a live-in maid as it is adjacent to the kitchen. I was looking forward to it. "I've something for you, John," said Deborah. "You will need a day and an evening uniform, and I don't want to hire again and get the wrong order. So I have bought you these dresses. They are plain, but with this apron and cap they should be suitable as uniforms. Go and try them on." I had already moved my fancy dress party costume and accessories into what I now call the maid's room. I put on the mid-length dress, which was lilac in color with a satin-like finish, which I thought suited me. The dress had a V-neck and 3/4 length sleeves. There was no trim. On its own it could easily be, say, a party dress. I added the apron and cap that Deborah had bought and slipped on the heels from the party costume. The other dress was similar but plain black with a round collar. I went out to see Deborah in my evening uniform. "Oh, I like it," said Deborah. "You will be perfect. But we need to do something with your hair. Keep the uniform on and serve me dinner in the dining room." I was pleased. Deborah was slipping into the role of a mistress, I suspect without realizing it. "Joan," said Deborah, "you are Joan this weekend, so your day uniform will be appropriate for today. I'll help you with some light makeup." We had just woken. I was still in our bed. It will be tonight when I sleep in the maid's room. After breakfast, while you are getting the house ready, remove any pictures that can identify you as my husband. It was about mid-afternoon when the doorbell rang. Deborah indicated that I should answer the door. I opened it and there was a pretty woman, about our age, standing there. I recognized her from the book club. "Hello," I said softly. "Hello, I'm Jane," she said with a smile. Just then Deborah appeared behind me. "Hi, Jane," greeted Deborah. "Please come in." They gave each other a quick hug. Jane is our overnight guest. She is also a hairstylist," said Julia. "She is going to style your hair and give you a makeover as my treat. I think your hairstyle is too manly and you should have a more feminine style. Why don't you take Jane through to your bathroom?" I had not cut my hair for 2 months before I retired or since. It was long enough now for a reasonable short style. The men in my family do not experience male pattern baldness, so I had a full head of hair, but I was going gray. "Joan, I am going to trim your hair so it will be easy for you to maintain and be presentable for a maid. I would like to color it, but we don't have time this afternoon." "Do you have any preference?" asked Jane. "No, I am quite happy for you to do as Mrs. Stevens asked. She is paying after all," I replied. She gave me a pixie cut, which with my short hair flattered me. Then she surprised me. "It's John, isn't it? Actually, I do know who you are, don't worry. Your secret's safe with me," she said. "I've brought something which will help you look even more realistic." She opened a box and brought out a pair of breast forms. "Take out whatever you have in your bra and put these in." She handed me the forms. "Now, I'm going to give you a makeover, so you will look your best tonight." She also shaped my eyebrows and applied a discreet evening makeup. I was taken aback by my new look. I intend to keep the style, but it would depend on Deborah, of course. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, my heart leapt. The woman in the mirror couldn't possibly be me. I hadn't realized looking like a woman was as pleasurable as being a maid, maybe more so. I did like the feel of my new breasts, especially when I moved. I returned to complete the dinner preparations, before changing into my evening uniform. I made every effort for tonight to be a game changer. I cooked occasionally before, but since my retirement, as you know, I had been focusing on developing my cooking skills and expertise. I had also been studying how maids and waitresses should behave. My intention was to make Deborah an outstanding hostess who was proud of her maid and for me to become indispensable. No going back. Well, the dinner was a success. Nobody noticed me, which is how it should be with a maid. They congratulated Deborah profusely on the food, the quality and presentation, and the evening as a whole. Once all the guests had left, Deborah and Jane retreated to the lounge while I cleared up. I then kept myself busy in the kitchen while waiting for them to retire. They talked late into the night before going up. I was surprised because Jane had an early start. I had set the alarm and was in the kitchen dressed in my day uniform. I had brushed my hair to maintain my new style and applied some makeup mainly to feminize my face, but it also made me feel good. I was getting better at it. I looked the part when Deborah, followed shortly by Jane, came down. I did wonder if they had been sharing a bed, but later when I did the bedrooms it was clear that they had slept apart, to my relief. I prepared and served them breakfast. It wasn't long before Jane said goodbye to her, but before she left she whispered to me, "Keep the forms for the time being, you can return them later. When you have cleared up can you bring me another cup of coffee in the lounge," said Deborah. I knocked on the lounge door. I was in maid mode after all, and Deborah said, "Enter." "Please sit down, Joan," she instructed as I placed her coffee in front of her. My friends were very impressed with my dinner party last night. And certainly having help made a big difference, not only to the success of the evening but to my social standing. I have come to realize I enjoy being a hostess, so I intend to receive and entertain my friends at home more often from now on. She paused to take a sip of coffee. My tummy was in knots in anticipation, but I said nothing and showed no emotion. I have decided that, as you have no other activities other than being a house husband, that you are to become my maid permanently. There will be, of course, a change in our relationship as I am now your mistress and head of the household. You will move permanently into the downstairs guest room, which will now be the maid's room. You will remove all your belongings from my bedroom and put them into storage in the loft. You may retain your shaving kit for the time being. You will address me as ma'am and refer to me as Mrs. Stevens. I remain married to you and wish to keep my married name. I will call you Doggett. I cannot call you Stevens, that would be confusing, so I will use your mother's maiden name. You are half Doggett after all. So your name is Mrs. Joan Doggett. I think a maid of your age could be married, and of course you are. You will officially remain John Stevens for my convenience and to keep our joint account so I can receive your pension. I have rules. You will not speak unless spoken to. If I am at home, you will remain in the kitchen or your room. A maid must not be seen. You will not enter a room unless I summon or expect you. You will always knock and wait for my permission. You will not leave the house without my permission and then only for household shopping or essential trips. You will wear your day uniform, with 3-inch heels, changing to your evening uniform, with 4-inch heels, at 6 o'clock. When I am out, you may wear protective clothing and flat or low-heel shoes when carrying out household tasks. When you go out you may wear a plain dress and dress according to the season. I will supply you with all your clothing needs, you will wear nothing else. You will be presentable at all times. Your duty will be to do whatever I tell you to do. You will have breakfast ready for me in the morning and dinner ready when I come home. You will serve me in the dining room. You will eat in the kitchen when you are able to. When I'm out during the day you will clean the house, do the laundry and prepare meals. I will let you know if I require lunch, have guests or if I am out in the evening. I'm now going out, you are dismissed. Wow, that was an unexpected but desired sea change, I thought, after I had a chance to reflect on what Mrs. Stevens had announced. I had said nothing, because it was no longer my place to do so. I wondered if something else had happened to accelerate her to rapidly change from my partner to my mistress. It is what I wanted and had worked towards. I am now her subservient maid and at her behest and desire. Now I need to avoid doing anything that prevents me attaining my ultimate aim, to be under her total control, and because that is what she desires, not because it is what I want. Mrs. Stevens arrived home a little earlier than I expected, but I was changed and ready for her. Doggett, there are some packages in my car. Retrieve them and take them to your room and then serve dinner, she ordered. I had prepared her favorite soup, carrot and coriander, with freshly baked rolls, followed by a quiche Lorraine with green leaf salad. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to agree to a menu with her first or not, but it was my intention to follow normal practice or take orders and not to make suggestions. While she was eating I stood back, coming forward to replenish her wine or to serve. Doggett, I will take coffee in the lounge, she said. After I had served her, she looked at me. The packages you took to your room are your clothes that you will need for the time being. I have bought you some additional plain dresses, 2 sets of underwear, 6 pairs of tights and 3 night dresses, as well as some cosmetics and other items you will need to keep yourself presentable. I have also bought you 2 pairs each of your day and evening heels and a pair of plain trainers. There are clothes for when you are cleaning. For when you go out there is also a jacket. I will lend you one of my old tote bags. In due course I will order online 3 day uniforms and 3 evening uniforms. You will wear 1 set, have 1 set in the wash and 1 set ready to wear. In the meantime you will wear a dress with an apron and cap. You will repair your clothes, but I will replace them anytime to ensure you are presentable. Now return to the kitchen. I will call you when I need something. I was glad she had bought some new underwear. I only had the set of party underwear. I went to clear up the dinner things and to prepare for breakfast. I was not summoned before she retired, not even a good night. I was thrilled. I had been expecting to help her get ready for bed. Of course, I had seen her routine thousands of times over the years, so I knew how to help. She stayed at home the following day. I wore my new plain dress. An electrician came and installed a servant's bell system. She could now summon her maid by bell without having to call out. Life settled down into a routine. Over time we became familiar with our new roles. I was very happy but did not show it. We became more distant as befitting a mistress and a domestic maid back in the day. She hardly smiled, but I couldn't decide whether she was her old self and wasn't enjoying our changed arrangement, or a new dominant persona that was not showing any emotion, just as I wasn't. Most of the time I didn't exist, although she ate my meals and benefited from my cleaning and laundering. We never kissed, hugged or held each other. I only touched her if necessary when carrying out my duties. But she did come alive when we had guests. She was entertaining more frequently and friends were more likely to drop in when passing. I had to be on my toes, always presentable and able to rustle something up. I was expected to anticipate her and her guests' needs, which I did very well, but occasionally she had to acknowledge my presence to issue a command. But I would catch a brief admiring glance every now and again. Some months had passed. I was improving. It was now difficult to tell that I was a man underneath, and I picked up a general buzz amongst her friends about how lucky she was to have such a wonderful and loyal maid. One day after dinner she told me about a dinner she had arranged for next Saturday. There were 2 guests who would be staying overnight. I was to make up a guest room. On this occasion she wished to approve the menu. I hovered expectantly after she had finished breakfast. "What is it, Doggett?" she asked. "I wish to suggest a menu for Saturday night for your approval, ma'am," I replied. "I have planned 3 courses, homemade pâté on toast, followed by beef Wellington and finishing with a cold layered dessert of chocolate and strawberry mousse with cream over shortbread. And in case that is insufficient, I can prepare a cheese board." "That will be acceptable," she replied. "Prepare some canapés for when they arrive at 6 and serve dinner at 8. Deborah's circle of friends had always been women of a similar age from the days when I was working during the day. So I was surprised when her 2 guests turned out to be young men. She was old enough to be their mother. Even to my male eye they both were fit and handsome. Throughout the evening the conversation was light and not memorable, and there was much flirting, although more in fun than serious. After dinner they retreated to the lounge. I kept them piled with drinks so much that all 3 were getting quite playfully drunk. I was dismissed to the kitchen and then I heard the bell. "Doggett, we are retiring now. Remain on duty as I expect I may ring for you later," said Deborah. "Come on, boys, time for bed," she said, pretending to drag them up the stairs. I had been thoroughly enjoying my retirement and being a submissive to my wife, albeit only as a maid. But tonight and what I had just seen horrified me. Being a cuckold husband had never occurred to me and I didn't like it. I now wish I hadn't started it. Then the servant's bell rang summoning me to the master bedroom, our bedroom. Perhaps I was required to clean everybody up. I knocked on the bedroom door. I was trembling. I heard, "Enter." So I did and saw Deborah sitting up in bed on her own wearing her blush pink satin camisole, the one I liked. She pulled back the sheet and patted the bed. "Please join me, John." I hesitated, then without thinking rushed over and slipped in beside her and we lay there just holding each other. "I miss you, darling," she said. After a while I slipped out of the bed and took off my now creased uniform and underwear. I was nude with a pixie cut, makeup and hairless, but clearly a husband and not a maid. And I got back in and straddled my wife. No talk, we just made love and then fell into a contented sleep. I woke up first with a jolt. "The guests will want breakfast." I started to rise and Deborah pulled me back. "Where are you going?" "I need to get dressed and get breakfast ready," I replied. "No need, my guests left last night." "There are just us 2, she said and then kissed me. We made love again. We had a lot of catching up to do. I still made breakfast, for the 2 of us. Afterwards, Deborah dragged me into the lounge. "Let's talk," she grinned. "I better explain and then you can explain, and then we can decide what we are going to do next." She paused while we settled down. "Ever since you took early retirement, I had been puzzled by your behavior and how things were turning out, but decided to go along with your apparent wishes until I understood what was happening," Deborah explained. "I told my friends that you just sat around all day after your early retirement and that I was worried. Jane mentioned that her husband had retired early and taken on all the household chores and perhaps I should encourage you to do the same. I reminded them we had Julie and no doubt you had something in mind. But when I discovered our outgoings were now too high it was then an obvious solution. But when you changed into a maid's uniform for the book club, I had just no idea what was going on. But as you seemed willing and there was no time to deal with it so I let it go. The following day over lunch my close friends asked about you. Deborah then gave me an account of what happened at the restaurant with her closest friends Jane, Susan, Zainab and Grace. Deborah's story. Deborah, is your maid a trans woman? Asked Grace. We are a broad-minded bunch, so it was curiosity. I was wondering how to reply. I wasn't sure myself, to be honest. It was John, wasn't it? There was a photo of you two on a side table, said Susan. Yes, it was, I replied and added, I don't know what is happening and I am getting worried. Maybe John is a crossdresser. My Eric is, he occasionally dresses up and he wears a maid's dress when he is doing the housework, said Jane. I have no idea, I replied, but ever since we went to a reverse fancy dressed party, when John dressed up as me and I as him, he has been preoccupied. But he is only dressing as a maid and he seems to be trying to get me to tell him what to do. I have always known Eric was a crossdresser, said Jane. But when he started wearing a maid's dress, I asked him why. He said he just enjoyed it and it helped him get through the chores. He then said something that seemed odd at the time. He said he didn't want to be a submissive maid and for me to dominate him, he wasn't that type. I wonder if John wants to be a submissive maid? I hope that isn't the case, I replied. I don't want to dominate or control him, far from it, it is not who I am, but it does explain what he might be trying to achieve. We had a talk today at work about something called nudge theory, said Grace. You try to change somebody's behavior indirectly, without them knowing. For example, if you encourage somebody to drink less, you don't give them a health message, you, for example, serve wine in smaller glasses. People drink less without realizing it. Interesting, I said. It was my decision for him to become a house husband, but it was only because his income was less and he was sitting around all day doing nothing. But it was John's decision to take the offer of early retirement on less income and to do nothing. And he didn't protest when I suggested it. That's a good example of nudging you into suggesting that he should do the chores. I bet he also nudged his boss to give him earlier retirement, commented Grace. But I didn't decide he should dress a maid. I certainly did not order a maid's uniform. I ordered a hotel waiter's uniform and they sent what is really a hotel waitress's uniform. I just accepted the situation presented to me. I reflected. I think John may be trying to modify your relationship so he can be a subservient maid. He is seeking to influence your behavior through a series of nudges so you would in effect be controlling him. He would become the maid he wants to be by you changing him because you apparently want to, concluded Grace. I want John to be whatever he desires to be, even a maid. But being his dominant wife to his subservient maid is not what I want. I'm not going to change my mind. He can nudge all he likes, I declared. Why don't we do our own nudging, suggested Zainab, or rather you, Deborah. What do you have in mind? I asked Zainab. What do you want to achieve? What do you want John to be? She replied. John could revert to being your husband, as a house husband or with you two sharing the household chores, suggested Susan before I replied. I did like the arrangement, I said, but I would prefer him having a more active and social life. But it might not stop his urges, and I don't want him to suffer. He could still be your maid, but not subservient, a house husband in a dress, like my Eric, suggested Jane. That may be better, but it still doesn't feel right. I've been looking forward to spending more time together when he retires, but it is all too soon. I don't want to give up the time I spend with you guys, I said. If John's desires could be deflected from being a maid to being a regular crossdresser, and I mean presenting himself as a woman, and he is presentable enough and not looking like a man in a dress, that is, he could become one of us, exclaimed Jane. I know our husbands would feel out of place if they joined our little group and they would be bored out of their minds with what we do and talk about, but not if they were one of us as such. You can get the best of both worlds, Deborah, a new girlfriend during the day. I just realized that would make us an even six, who you get to take home to be your husband. Susan, Zainab and Grace all burst out squealing with delight and applauding. I like that, I said, but I want him to want to do it, not because I wouldn't let him be a submissive maid. We will nudge him, said Grace. We talked around the subject for some time. My friends were very keen to bring him, or rather Joan, aboard. So to summarize, said Jane, taking the lead. I suppose it should have been me, but her cross-dressing husband gave her some authority. We will come round to dinner next Saturday, for which Deborah will be hostess, but John will prepare and serve. I'll come early and make him as convincing as possible, and I'll stay over so that John has to sleep in what could become the maid's room. During the dinner, if each of you think he is passable and you are happy for him to join our group, let me know. If the answer is yes, then the following morning Deborah will start playing the dominant mistress. Like an aristocratic lady of the house back in the day, I interjected, but no whips, humiliation or BDSM. We all laughed. Of course, continued Jane, just strictly a non-personal distant relationship. The minimum for John to carry out his duties. When it is judged that he may be regretting his new lifestyle and could be amiable to reconsider if given the chance, then we give an extra nudge. This is exciting, said Zainab. In due course, Zainab's and Grace's sons can be invited to a special dinner with Deborah, prepared and served by John, of course, said Jane. The three will act as if you are up for a threesome, and when it's late you head for Deborah's bedroom. Except the two boys will leave quietly. After a suitable time, Deborah will summon John, who by then will believe that his marriage is in name only and he has been made a cuckold. When he enters the bedroom, he will see Deborah is on her own and welcoming him to join her in their marital bed. Now it is the moment of truth. If the nudge works, he will choose Deborah's gesture. But if not, then he has likely accepted that Deborah was being unfaithful and he is consumed with desire to be as submissive. In the morning you can then discuss your future. The day after, the rest of us will be waiting in our favorite Italian restaurant with a table reservation for lunch for 6. Thank you, Jane, I said. I hear your comment about him not making the right choice, but underneath I know my husband. And thank you everyone, you are such great and loving friends. I'll see you all next Saturday. John's story. So you see, John, Deborah said to me, it was a plan to turn the tables on you. I was to show no affection or to acknowledge you, as if you were a lowly servant way beneath me. We had a lot of fun drawing up the list of rules. I was to take you to the extreme, by apparently cuckolding you, hoping it would be a humiliation too far and you would crack and return to normality. It looks like my nudge worked. Grace was right, I confessed. I was using nudge theory to get you to make decisions, apparently your own, to turn me into a subservient maid to your dominant mistress. But for some reason I had rationalized it that you had to turn me because you wanted to please yourself, not to please me. I was horrified when I saw you take those two men upstairs last night. So much so that when I realized you were welcoming me into your bed, the relief was so great that the edifice I had built up came crashing down. Oh, how wrong I was. How will you ever forgive me for putting you through my warped fantasy? Of course I do, she replied, but why that fantasy? It goes back to the party where we swapped roles. I loved being you and how people treated me. I loved the tight skirt and high heels and the feeling of vulnerability. I'm surprised you felt that way, but a tight skirt makes me feel sexy and heels give me power. Well, it had the opposite effect for me. I felt I was now of the weaker sex and my position was to serve and obey. The other partygoers, and even you, treated me differently. And I wanted to please. I noticed. You spent much of the party just fetching drinks. You weren't your usual self being the center of the party. You looked so pretty I was sure you would be the center of attraction. But you seemed to quietly merge into the background. I thought it was because you were uncomfortable and embarrassed being dressed as a woman. You were certainly anxious about the whole idea. But I loved it. I liked the way everyone treated me. As if I was only there to serve. I was invisible to everyone, unless they wanted a drink or some food, and even then they didn't acknowledge me, except for the occasional pinch or slap from some of the male guests, who were men after all even if they were wearing dresses. Did you enjoy being treated as a woman that way? Yes and no. As the evening passed I became increasingly obsessed with the pleasure of it all. I didn't like being pinched or slapped. It wasn't the pain, but I feared someone may have gone too far. It was being treated as meek and insignificant but indispensable. And looking and being taken as a woman and not one of the male guests. I did wonder why you seemed to be circulating but not socializing. Again, I thought it was because you were embarrassed. Oh no, I was thrilled in this new me that I had unexpectedly found. I didn't understand why, but I wanted to experience it again. So for some weeks afterwards I spent time on the internet. And then I came across this website full of stories that fascinated me. After a while I was drawn to ones where the husband was forced by his dominant wife to serve her as a maid. And I knew that is what I wanted. But you know that I could not be that wife, even if I was just role-playing. I know, and I knew it couldn't be role-play. I desperately wanted to be your obedient maid, and it would only work if you were truly my dominant mistress. No way would I enjoy being a dominatrix. No, sorry, love, I mean like the lady of the house. With me being a mere servant who knew her place. I just wanted to dress and be a maid like in those period dramas. I still wanted to be a man and your husband, even in name only, and you are and would be the only woman in my life. I'm glad to hear. You being a man and my faithful husband, that is. Once I had decided what I wanted, I hatched a plan where I would become your subservient maid because that is what you wanted. I thought my plan had worked, but clearly I was wrong. Because my friends and I hatched a counter plan. So what do we do now? Before I answered, she continued. I enjoyed having a maid, but not when you were distant like you were, although that was part of your plan. But what I really enjoyed was the entertaining. You were a brilliant hostess and I was enjoying my improved social life. Except that you were not truly part of it, as my partner. You should have been taking the credit and admiration from my friends directly, and not through me. They truly admired you and were quite envious. Now what? Deborah asked. I have my husband back, but what about you, John? And what about Joan? I'm afraid Joan will now always be a part of me. I wanted to serve you, to please you, and being a maid was the stereotypical way to do that. But I discovered I do like dressing and presenting as a maid, but after a while I started to aspire to dress in normal clothes. I believe I'm a crossdresser. Let's discuss our future later. Would you like to go and put on your outdoor dress and then I'll meet you in our bedroom? We are going out as Joan and Deborah, she said, beaming. I did as she asked. I'm not sure what she had in mind, but it seemed quite exciting. I had been to the shops in my so-called public dress. I got dressed in my maid's room and went up to our bedroom. She was already dressed, ready to go out. You may be wearing a plain gray dress, but we are going to smarten you up. She offered me a red sash. Tie this around your waist. She then handed me a matching necklace and bracelet. And then finally, a long black and white chiffon scarf. Now you are no longer a domestic worker on an errand, you are a smart woman out for the day. We enjoyed our day out, spending it in the local town center. We did plenty of window shopping and then stopped for a late lunch. It was a sunny day, so we visited a pub with a garden. Let's talk now, said Deborah. As I see it, you can revert to being John, maybe even get your job back. But you will need to make new friends or interests. My circle of friends are all women, we have not yet welcomed a husband to join us. And I don't want you to go back to being a house husband, we can share the cooking and the chores. Of course, you can stay as a maid. But not a subservient one, but as a modern domestic worker with a good relationship with her employer. I want you to be my friend. But there is another option, which I am comfortable with after today's experiences. You could join us, my friends, as Joan. Then we can spend all our time together, as we originally planned for when you retired. Any thoughts? I'll rule out the maid option straight away. I don't see how we can have a relationship we can both enjoy. I realize that now, my fantasy was built on a misunderstanding of what I wanted and what I expected. But I do enjoy the dressing and the cooking, I said. I do know that the desire to crossdress is there. Once I had dressed as a woman at that fancy dress party, there was no going back. The compulsion fed into the desire to be a maid, but I needed to be told what to do and be useful. I am quite sure if I stayed at home I would dress, maybe just occasionally or far more, I just don't know. But I don't think I could just sit around all day dressed as a woman, or indeed a man. I would just get bored. I continued. If you do really want me to, then I'll like the idea of joining your friends as Joan, if they would have me. I enjoyed serving them and thought they were a good crowd. How would they accept me? As your husband? As your former maid? I asked. At the book club, I am quite sure some suspected you were my John. No one had met you before,